Hey everybody, it's Finn here, NOLA Nerdcast, talking with the team, part of the team behind Aether and Iron, talking to Duane and Tyler, the creative director and narrative director, respectively, of the game. How are you gentlemen doing?
Fantastic. It's Tuesday.
It
It,
is Tuesday. Doing all
it's
right for a
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Now, I was actually supposed to talk to you about your game, but instead I'm going to pivot and talk to Duane about his Tron cabinet behind him because
Oh,
I
oh,
feel like, is that a real thing? Is that real?
I forgot to turn it on. It's an arcade one-up. It's not the real thing, so
Okay.
it's the
Still
tribute
cool
thing. But
though.
yeah, and I forgot to turn it on because it's a nice little decoration behind the over the shoulder there. But the spinner broke. I bought a replacement spinner. Also, fun fact: I drove 5 hours to get that because they were out of production, and I drove uh, from San Bernardino County up to Bishop, California, and back again with this thing in the back of my truck because it was the only one in California I could find. So,
Um,
um,
so for those that don't know, Aether Iron it came out earlier this year at the very end of March. So it's basically like a deco punk RPG set in a retro futuristic New York. But I thought it might be better to hear from y'all to tell people what it is Aether Iron actually is.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with kind of hitting the genre type of thing. Is that so? When we were putting together, when I was putting together concepts for what this world could look like, one thing that I was really into at the time, still into, but was the 1939 World's Fair in New York. And then just also a lot of the concepts of the time of like what does the future look like, right? What could it possibly be but from the perspective of the 1930s? For most of human history, things didn't change much, and so concepts of a vastly different future just like wasn't top of mind. But after the Industrial Revolution, you have people start imagining, like, well, if this can change in my lifetime, what could it possibly be in 30, 40, 100 years? Like, how different could the world be? And that's when you start kind of getting this emergence of new sci-fi ideas. And so, uh, starting research in like 19th century concepts of the future into the 1930s when you start getting a lot more ray punk almost. All stuff that we drew upon when trying to figure out, okay, what is a world that we can understand, but also feels different, unique, special, and so that's where the decopunk idea comes from. Is what is the future imagined by people in the era? Um, and I think too is that so when we say a punk genre like deco punk, punk genres usually mean a resistance to something, right? Like steampunk is a resistance to the rapid industrialization. So it's you're dealing the story and the themes are all dealing with how do you fight this massive change in the world. Or diesel punk is like the nationalism and war machine of the 30s and 40s. And so deco punk I think is a genre that inherently comes from a population worried about the mass metropolization of kind of the world of New York and like kind of what that means to resist it, fight it, live within it, and that's kind of the story that we try to build out is a world where the city has become large, oppressive, and something you have to just deal with. And that's what we build the story within. Sorry, that was a long-winded thing, kind of on topic. Is that what
No,
you're asking
but it
for?
speaks to like your the process on how you arrived at what you released. You know, it's always fun to find out the thought patterns that led to what eventually came out.
Well, my thought patterns can be all over the place. So if at any point I start just going way off tangent, you
Tangents are
feel free
great;
to
they're half the fun.
course correct.
So, how long you guys? Your company is called Seismic Squirrel, and how long have you all been with the company? And how long has Aether and Iron actually been in development before it dropped?
that's a tricky question. We went through several iterations of the game. As I mentioned pre-rolling this interview, I was here several years ago for a bit, and then I left for an offer I couldn't refuse, and I stayed over at that other place for a couple of years. And then I saw Seismic had opened my job posting back, and I was like, oh, I want to go back. So I went back. So I've been here, if you put those two windows together, I've been here a little over 3 years. This iteration of the game has been in development, maybe three and a half years, but about 3 years before release. Um, so that was what this iteration. However, there were previous iterations of the game that were substantially different. So it's gone through a lot of evolution over the years. I'll let Tyler speak to the ancient history of Seismic
Oh,
before I got here.
yeah, I think um, Seismic started, I think, just over 7.5 years ago. And we started on a whole bunch of just smaller projects. I started off as a contractor, a contract writer, and I was just picking up
And look
work
at you
as
now.
yeah, like it's it is kind of cool. It's a moving through type of things because starting as a contract writer, I just been married and I was just like I gotta graduated college and I was like okay how am I gonna make money for a family being a writer. Like I got my lit degree. Awesome. Cool. What do I do with that? How do I put food on the table? And found Seismic Squirrel, started working on just like miscellaneous projects. Unfortunately, a lot of those little projects were shelved just because we were a bit overambitious, and I think that's probably what led to when Duane's talking about previous iterations. We were quite ambitious for how this game when this game started of what we wanted to do. And through iteration, we had to we scaled down, adjusted kind of our sights on what we wanted to make, and we're able to finally get something out on this current iteration when the team came together, the concept came together, and the stars aligned to actually put something out. So yeah.
Yeah, so to be clear, our 30 plus hour game with hundreds of fully voiced speaking parts and dozens of environments is our scaled down version of what we were trying to do.
Mhm.
What one thing that thank you for bringing that up. I was gonna mention myself, but the voice acting in this is fantastic, and the fact that all the characters, like main characters, tertiary characters, they all get a voice. What led to that? Because I know sometimes that's an issue people have. Like that's if they have to worry about budget, they cut down the voice acting and they but you guys doubled down on it, and I think the game benefited from that. What made you want to make sure that that came to fruition?
So I can give the artsy answer and then the practical answer.
Break
The
it down.
artsy answer is that you know narratively we wanted to make this world feel alive through any and every means. Right? It's always been a priority to make this world feel like it's something that exists outside of us rather than just a constructed thing in a digital space, right? And so having characters be voiced, even small and insignificant, um, that went towards that. It's just it made it feel more complete. Now, the practical element is that we got testing back early on, and the tests were like, "Wow, this is a lot of reading. It'd be great if the characters were voiced." And we're like, "You're right." And so there's a degree of like we understand that our game is uh, it is a pretty word heavy, narrative heavy RPG, and we want people to actually enjoy that. And we found that the best way to do so was to make sure that characters were voiced so that you didn't have to read every line as much as listen to the different lines. don't know,
Yeah,
Dwayne, if
I
you have
didn't know.
anything to
especially
add.
well, especially yeah, given the our limited graphical resources of just having the characters be paper dolls, and we do have
Yeah.
expressions on there and so on and so forth. But it's like the voiceover does help bring them to life. Like Mika, our character artist, did a fantastic job in concepting a lot of very charismatic imagery for these characters. You look at them, it's like, oh, I like that person, or oh, I very much dislike this person. But the voices really add to it, and we took a lot of time and effort in casting because it's really in my experience a good actor can take a mediocre script and make it great through the delivery. Not hopefully our script isn't mediocre, but like if you got good writing and good acting, then you're golden. And I think we did our best on the writing side to give the actors a lot of meat to
Well, I
chew
was gonna
on.
say, apparently other people agreed with you because you had a lot of nominations for at Gamescom
Mm,
best narrative. That turns out that's pretty good for you guys, considering you're a narrative game.
yeah,
Best art, best sound, like that's awesome. Shout out to your designer because those character designs are indeed fantastic.
yeah, she's
Oh,
great, and she
yeah.
spent the last number of years just drawing characters. So it's like eventually, like they were always great, but we went through so many iterations on the game. Like if you saw the early drafts of this from years ago, it's so substantially different than what we ended up with. But they're all great. They're just a very different vibe, a very different atmosphere and mood and style.
Yeah, we could honestly sing Mika's praise. Mika Tanagi is our character artist, and she is just phenomenal. Like Dwayne said, is that early iteration on this game, our our art style, our character style was very different, and she every step of the way she's just like, okay, hey, let's explore this, let's figure out what we can do with that, and we early iteration went very hard into kind of the anime aesthetic. Um, and over time, we transitioned into doing the more 1930s, 40s pulp novel, pulp comic type of aesthetic. And she accommodated and she created some amazing designs in response. We could not have made this world come alive without her.
That's
So
awesome.
all the kudos in the world to her. She's phenomenal.
Now, speaking of bringing this world alive, at first glance, like for people that just check it out, it evokes two games to mind. I'm sure you've heard people bring up Disco Elysium in the conversation, but also Sovereign Syndicate is another one that I played that reminded me of this game when I first found it. Now, but I've always been curious. I know we try not to be reductive and describe a game as it's like this but this,
Hmm.
but have you ever felt um, that it's beneficial sometimes to be associated with a game as beloved as Disco Elysium, or is that more just the pressure of being compared to a game like that when you're trying to do your own thing?
It was
Because
a very sorry. Um, I'll let you finish and then I'll.
oh no, it's just because when you have the dialogue heavy narrative stuff on one side and then dice rolls that help determine outcomes, it's you're gonna whether you want to or not usually draw comparisons. So I was just curious from your perspective as developers, what is your take on that?
Well, we didn't want to be compared to Disco Elysium because it's a really high bar. And not that we didn't have confidence in what we were doing, but you don't want to be like I've worked on a couple games in the distant past where it was like, well, this is going to be a GTA killer,
Yeah,
and
that
then
that
if you say that, you have to deliver, and if you don't, then you're notched down instead of being taken for what you are. So we very consciously tried to avoid, oh, it's like Disco Elysium or whatever, even though the format presentation is fairly similar. But when the demo got out and the press and the audience, that's what they kept saying. That was an external
right.
comparison that was put on us, which we're like, okay, great. If we are in that bracket, then yay us. But we didn't want to put ourselves there at all. And Sovereign Syndicate was an interesting one because that we were already well along on our game when we became aware of Sovereign Syndicate, and it was like, oh, look at that. It's a lot like ours. But then we ended up snagging a couple of other people. So You know, that that
Hey,
worked out.
we it's curious. It's funny that you mentioned the GTA killer, because that used to be such a marketing tactic companies would use. They would take whatever was popular that they were similar to and declare themselves the killer. I think the most famous example of that was like when Killzone 2 was being billed as the Halo killer, and it just invites all kinds. It's like you said, it suddenly now you're held up to an even higher standard, because and
Mhm.
if you fall short of that, then you no longer are your own product. You are
Yeah,
just the game that failed to live up to another one.
yeah, and we're well aware. Like one of the miracles of Seismic Squirrel to me is like we put out a game. Well, we put out a game. That's always a miracle. Every game is a
Right,
miracle.
especially in this industry.
Yeah, and then beyond that, it's a genre mashup of tactical and RPG. It's an original IP. It's 30 hours. It's heavy reading. It's a dense material, and it's our very first game we've ever done as a company, and the company is a mix of veterans and first timers. And just the fact not only that it came out, but it got the ratings that it did, and that it's getting the critical reception that it's getting, um, is really miraculous. But I think because we very much wanted it to be seen on its own terms rather than, like you said, like we're going to come out and we're going to kick Disco Elysium's butt.
Right.
No, we're not, and nobody should try. Um, so yeah, but yeah, getting nominated in the same categories is like, well, like I think we lost it at Gamescom to Expedition 33. It's like I'll take it. I'll take that
Yeah.
loss.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, it's not a problem.
You have to be say that you're like, yeah, we lost, but we lost to Expedition 33.
Yeah,
That's that's a very good outlook for that type of
yeah.
thing. So one cool thing when I think of your game, it has a very unique hook with the battle system, with it not being a traditional, turn-based or even strategy-based as people perceive it, because it's all car-based.
Mm,
Whoop, my lights turned off. There we go.
there it is.
Um, but because the battles take place on this apparently the world's longest highway, uh,
Yeah.
but it's car based, and so you can upgrade and tweak your cars in various different ways. How did you? Hey, how did that combat? I'm going to start with that. How did that combat system come about? Like, how did you decide on that mechanic? Because it's visually very unique.
Yeah. Well, we watched that one Fast and Furious, and we're like, this is obviously the best part of the movie. Just kidding. No, when we started off on Aether Iron, uh, the the core thing that we knew we wanted to do, core mechanic, was we wanted to have a turn-based tactical game of some kind, and knew that we wanted to have it with a vehicle. And so my job at the time, as the only narrative guy on the team, was to come up with a series of stories where that could make sense, or at least that gave the game permission to have vehicles of some kind, and then we'd let design figure out the rest later. And so, I disappeared into my goblin cave, had 10 or so different pitches, all sorts of things from, I think, I had a 1960s drive-in monster dating sim to using the Bermuda Triangle and like 1930s, 40s fighter planes, right? Like it was all over the place. And um the Aether Iron is what stuck, is what, and it came down to uh, like, okay, what are the coolest cars? Well, 1930s cars look awesome. Well, how do we make those cooler? Because 30s cars are 30s cars. We've seen other people do 30s cars. What can we do something different? And it's like, okay, what if we made them flying? So my job was to be like, okay, in what world do we have flying cars in the 1930s? And uh, that was kind of like the foundation for building out the world of like, okay, I had to make that make sense. There has to be a timeline. There has to be, some sort of MacGuffin material that arises, that is developed, and uh, how does the city react? How does culture react? How does the timeline react? All that type of stuff. And so what it turned into is that, we had this mechanical request, and then it created this kind of the idea of the 1930s cars flying, and then we had to build a world where that made sense, and then it created this feedback loop of okay, mechanics demand this world, and then the world demands this type of mechanics, right? And that's where we spend a lot of time in development of trying to hone that, the answers that came out of that loop. How do we make things work within this? So, is that answering your question? Is that making
It
sense?
is.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fascinating that the world grew up around the concept of wanting flying car combat rather than flying car combat coming out because you created a 1930s future world. I think that's awesome.
Well, I mean, it's a lesson that I feel like you learn pretty early in game development. In that, like I said, I joined right after college, and I had to learn a lot of lessons in video game right off the bat. One that you learn really hard, really fast as a writer is that this is a game, not a book. People don't necessarily want a book; they want to play something. And so mechanics and integrating those mechanics are really important into actually making something that people want to engage with. So when we when I when I approached writing this and when we approached kind of building it out, it was just like, okay, how do we do gameplay first as much as we can, um, in order to make something that felt different, unique, um, also something that just felt at least somewhat good to play. So yeah, it's gameplay first was where our heads were, um, and then it gave me all the runway I wanted to build out a world that could support it.
That's awesome. Um, Based following up on that with the battle system, you have a lot of customization in terms of like the types of cars you can have. Like there's the light cars, there's the vans, there's the tanker type stuff with all the different um, modifications you can add to it. How did you go about? And I don't know if you're because you're not a game designer if you can speak on this, but maybe you can just balancing the gameplay aspect with wanting people to experience the story instead of getting locked into a difficult battle and not being able to progress.
We very much, and still to this day, we wanted to keep the battle system. We didn't want to make a game that was very bean county and very hardcore tactics. Because I guess I don't want to say primarily, but we're very much an RPG and very much, story and skill checks and dice rolls and everything. And we didn't want people to get stuck at a battle. You're playing, if we want people invested in the story and then suddenly you're on a battle and you can't get past or whatever, that's just agonizingly frustrating. So we
Yes.
wanted to keep the entire system easy to understand, give it depth without giving it complexity. And so having those balances always, if you're going to err on the side of one thing, or of too difficult or too easy, err on the side of too easy, and hopefully you have those peaks and valleys, and you have it be so that people can still get through it. It might be, you want to have some things you got to try 2 or 3 times to get through it, but the key phrase that I kept using was depth depth without complexity. And as we're updating the game and putting out new patches and everything, we're even building on that still. But it was really about making sure that the players could experience the story without getting blocked by combat. We want combat to be engaging. We want it to be fun. We want it to be occasionally challenging, but it's not a hardcore tactics game. I guess it would be
Yeah.
more of a casual core tactics game. That was very much our approach.
Nice. Did you ever play around with the idea of just abandoning the combat in general and turning it into like a visual novel type game where you had the story in the world, but you just wanted to have that be the focus? Because that genre is kind of blown up in the last 5 years. I didn't know if that was ever something you had considered.
Well, I think 5 years ago it hadn't blown up yet, so no, not really.
Tyler was
We
so offended by the question,
yeah,
he
he's just like,
disengaged.
I think he's got a little munchkin in the background that he has
Oh yeah,
to tend
that's
to.
what makes it adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
she's
the
I have a little one I have to attend to. Apologies.
No, not at
She's
all. Please.
yeah.
Usually when I'm at home, my daughter pops up on screen too, just to say hi to whoever I'm talking to.
you know,
Just part of the fun.
um,
Sorry, but please, Dwayne.
well, no, I mean, I got the dogs. I don't know if you heard them earlier. They're having a little conniption fit.
That's
So
just
if I go
life.
mute or dark, then it's dogs. Yeah, working at home. Yay. But we've always, at least as long as I've been here, it's always been combat or tactics and RPG,
Nice.
and wanting to do that genre mashup. Um, we have veered substantially at times. Well, let's have less combat. Let's have more combat. And we did some external player feedback tests and stuff like that early on, and you get all different answers. Some people want more combat, some people want less combat, and so there's plenty of practical, production, budgetary, and design reasons to lean one way or the other. So it's a bit of a fine line that we walked in trying to do that, and we still get that kind of feedback. Some players want more combat, and some players just want to get on with the
Yeah.
story. But I think, again, based on the feedback and the overall big picture ratings we've gotten, people seem to be pretty happy with
With
that
the
genre
mix.
mashup. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, one cool trend in the last decade or so in games has been the push for quality of life and accessibility options. Do you guys have any that you're proud of or that are included in Aether and Iron?
Tyler handle that.
Well, actually I wanted to say something, but I don't know if we put it in
Oh,
yet. Uh,
oh, give me the
the
exclusive. Come on.
oh no, it's I don't know if it's exclusive. It's just like I haven't checked if it's in. It's supposed to be in. So I'm colorblind, and it's led to some. Uh, I get a bad rap for doing presentations, and the colors are all terribly clashing. So we're supposed to be having a colorblind mode, and at some point, um, and but most of the accessibility conversations are not something that I'm directly involved in. So, Duane, I don't know if you have more of an
I mean, I'm
insight than
not
I do.
directly involved with them, but there are things like, things we have to be concerned about with font size because our UI is fairly, you know, squinty in some instances and stuff. So we're trying to get, make sure that people can read the text heavy game. And
Oh, that's an
as Tyler
important
said,
one.
the colorblind mode, yeah, it's big. It's also interesting when you get into translation, when you go into German. It's like suddenly every word is this, it
Right.
takes up that much space on the screen. So that's a fun one. But yeah, the two that I'm the most aware of have been the colorblind mode and the variable text mode.
Nice. Um, what I know everyone. It's like when you're a parent and you're only supposed to you love everyone equally. But I have to ask anyway, without spoiling anything story wise. What are your favorite characters in the game? Like who's your personal bestie?
I like
Hmm.
the cheese and crackers civilian guy, but Gia would be my favorite character. So I think the performance that we got in the actress Rhiannon Mushal was if I said her last name right. She got so invested in the game that she was answering questions to us as we were going through the script. We were like, wait, is it because the script is exported out of order? So it's very important that we're aware of what every single line is in the context, so we could give the context to the actor. And by a few sessions in, we were like, wait, I got to look up the context of that. And she's like, she knew because she read it, she memorized the whole thing and everything. So it was pretty crazy that she was more of an expert on the character and on the game story than we were at that point.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, it's just the way Gia's written her presentation, her whole vibe. She's my favorite character I've ever worked on in any game, actually.
What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, no, that is a hard question because I don't know. There's so many characters that have like elements of it that I remember being obsessed with when we started. Because the big thing about when we're building the characters was we wanted, for a lot of them, the main characters for sure anyway, we tried to find some sort of historical parallel to base them on. And uh, since I was a big fan of history going into this, and I just fall in love with the character beforehand, right? Uh, Even before they were written. And then I think so. A lot of the characters that we have, to me, it's hard to distinguish between kind of what our fictitious representation versus the kind of actual historical character. Um, I think, yeah, I'm not going to give you a straightforward answer. So there's characters that I love. I love parts of. Like I love Luca, which is our Union man. He's based off of a Italian Union leader that disappeared, and then a little bit of James Braddock, the Cinderella Man boxer. Um, Also pulled in stories from my grandpa, who was a lifelong Union man, to kind of build him. So he has a bit of a special place in my heart, as well as his wife, based off my grandma. Um, oh, one moment, baby.
I was gonna say there's a
uh,
little bit of a on the waterfront Brando in him too.
yeah, Brando as well. Uh, I think though maybe who my favorite is. Um, oh goodness. Okay, there's two that I love. Even though they don't get as much screen time. I love. There's a character in the first act. Her name is Banger Burns, and she is an Irish gun runner, and she's based off of the Pirate Queen of New York, who existed in the 19th century. She was a bandit who dressed like a pirate, talked like a pirate, had a ship on the East River, and she would go a raiding, and she buried her treasure. And she has an amazing story. She's
I
based
gotta
off
look her up
Sadie the
now.
goat, um, and just I love that story because it's so ridiculous and it has a happy ending. A lot of like historical stories, have a chance of just like not ending well. But like, yeah, if I'm not going to go through the whole story because I want to be fair here. But then I think the other one is the villain or kind of villain in the second act. Um, Her name is Marm, and she's based off of Queen of the Underworld in New York at the time, the 19th century, and she was a larger than life character who wanted to rejuvenate Klein Deutschland or Little Germany, and so she created a a syndicate of female thieves and con women, and they kind of ran the town for a hot second. She created schools for criminality to teach like street urchins how to survive and to pickpockets and con people. And it started going downhill when she accidentally admitted the son of the police chief or police commissioner. Um, and she ended up having this daring escape into Canada. Um, and it's like I think those two characters I just like I fell in love with. I spent way too much time digging into history of who they were and what they're about, and so building out the characters just felt special because it's like I don't know the little tethers to history.
Yeah,
Maybe.
that is a slightly off topic, but the amount of crazy stuff in our game that is real or just a reality adjacent is insane. Most of the craziest stuff in the game, flying cars accepted, obviously, is actually very much based on reality. And you are like a fleet of militant garbage men. What is that? That was real. That happened. That was a real thing. And we just lifted that out of history and plopped it into our flying New York. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
things you would think are the most outlandish are actually the true things.
That makes it so much more fun, though.
Hmm.
um, Well, I would like to pivot and talk a little bit more about like you as a person. So I'd like to know kind of like your origin story, so to speak. Like, how did you get into gaming, and what led you to wanting to work in the industry? Like, were you a gamer prior to Seismic Squirrel, or where? How did you start?
Um, yeah, I can take it first. Yeah, I think the story that I like to tell about how this all started, because we hear a lot of comparisons to BioShock, and yeah, the reality is that it's a little bit of a love letter to something that was a big influence on me growing up. Because when I first started playing games, so I first started playing games with my dad, who had this old box computer that could barely do anything. But we played Civilization 2 on it, and that was third grade, and I was obsessed. I would take the materials from the actual like game set, like it came with like a map of all the technology tree, and I'd bring that to school and I'd study it, and I'd try to convince my teachers that this was a historical game that we should play in class. Um, no, never went anywhere. But then growing up, went into high school, and the first game that I felt like as a more mature gamer that could appreciate the artistry of something was I really got into BioShock because I was really into reading dystopian novels at the time. Um, and but based off because of circumstance, I was only able to play the first few hours, put the game down, didn't pick it up. But that kind of uh, the the story itself kind of just stuck with me. It hung in there, and I made up stories in my head. I imagined how the story would end, how the game would end, where it could go, what it would look like, how was the world built. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was able to actually finish and play through the game. Um, and I think that inspired me for a lot of this is because like in a world where so many games are coming out, so many amazing games, and people only have a few hours, or maybe they can only get a little bit of time to play a game like ever before putting it down, moving on to something else. I was hoping to build something similar for what BioShock did for me. Is it like, can I give you a world and something to think about, to zone out when you're on, driving or in the shower or doing nothing, that you can just imagine with. Um, and so that went into a lot of kind of figuring out the world building and making sure the world building had detail and reason, because I'm not just wanting to think about our existing story, but the stories that people could build for themselves inside of it. So um, there's my long rambly answer that's kind of answering your
That's
question.
why I asked that question, because it's always fascinating.
My answer might be long for a different reason,
Hit me.
which is showing in the gray in my beard.
I wouldn't know. What?
Yeah, I well, give my age away, my first video game was my dad brought home the original Pong game that was just a silver box with two dials on it.
Nice.
Like that was, and the big screen TVs. I remember when TVs didn't have remote controls, when the kids were the remote. Get up and change the channel. So, sort of Pong, and then we were the first. We were always early tech adopters on our neighborhood, so we had the Atari 2600 before anybody, and we had a PC before anybody. We had a PC with a color monitor before anybody, but I never learned any kind of technical stuff. But I was always drawing pictures, whether it was on the computer or at home. And I was president of the Dungeons and Dragons Club in seventh grade, and doing all of that kind of thing. Movies, games, and books were sort of all this one and the same to me, and I just wanted to be involved in that. I knew I couldn't imagine a world in which creativity wasn't part of my DNA. And I was in college. I walked into the job office because they needed a job, and they had a posting on the wall that said, "Can you draw this character?" And it was a dwarf, and I was like, "Probably not." But I had inherited a computer from my brother who was messing around with this thing called 3D Studio, and he called me up one day and said, "I'm getting a computer upgrade. Do you want my old one?" I said, "Sure." And I didn't know how to. do anything, but I was going to school full time. I was working full time, and I would come home. I would get home around midnight and work until 2 or 3 in the morning on the computer, learning this 3D stuff, learning how to animate. And I went to that company that had the drawing thing, um, and it was a little company called Blizzard. They had about 19 people, and I dropped off my disc of my little character animations and my spaceships that I had built flying through space, and I went home, and I just dropped it off, and there was a answering machine light blinking, and they said, "Hey, come back. We want to talk to you." So I went back, and funny story, I had all my laundry stolen out of my apartment laundromat the day before, so I had a pair of sweats with no shoes and no socks, and so I showed up at Blizzard with barefoot, wearing sweats, and president of the company, Alan Adham, talked to me for a little bit. Hey, what's going on with this 3D stuff that you're doing, and why aren't you wearing any shoes? I told him the laundromat story. He gave me $100, said, "Go buy yourself some clothes. You got the job. Start tomorrow." So I, within 3 months, I was the 3D art director, and within a couple of years, I was studio art director. So I was not the first 3D guy there, but I was the first dedicated 3D only guy there, and kind of got my formative experience there. After about 7 years, I left and went to Activision before it was Blizzard Activision. Um, Cinematics director on some stuff, and then I went off and made movies and decided I hated the film industry and came back to games. And I started a company, and we did Roblox concerts, so little Nas X and 21 Pilots and all of that stuff. We did all of those performance performance capture and all this stuff with those characters. And then like I said, that's actually why I left Seismic the first time. And then when the job opening came back up for creative director, things were complicated at the Roblox thing, so I came back here.
Well, it definitely explains the StarCraft poster behind you.
Yeah, that was I got the sword in the garage. I got to hang my sword up. I got my 5-year sword, but it's
Nice.
buried in the garage.
Well, that's awesome. I started playing because my uncle bought me a Nintendo when I was 3 in the 80s, and I played Mario, and then kind of all came from there. But your game always interested me because RPGs have always been my genre. So when this first floated across me, I was like, oh, that's my jam. So it's just been delightful to talk to you guys. And I
Oh,
know,
thank you.
Tyler, you have a hard out in a couple minutes, so I'm going to ask my last question. Some say it's the hardest question. So I
Okay,
apologize in advance for the hard hitting journalism you're about to experience.
hit me.
But in your heart of hearts, if you have to choose cake or pie,
Oh, is there? I mean, any stipulations around who's making or what type?
this is your question.
Just
Whatever stipulations you
entirely.
want, they're in your
Okay,
head.
the best pie versus the best cake. Let's. Hmm. I'm going to choose pie because my wife cannot stand cake, and what's a dessert if you're not sharing it with somebody? So best pie.
I feel like that's a
Um,
great answer.
yeah.
Mine's gonna be a little bit complicated because, in a general sense, cake. But there was this one pie one time that had these cinnamon coffee crumbles on top and apple slices, and the hot apple pie thing. That was kind of the best cake or pie I ever had. So either that pie, or if we're speaking in generalizations, cake.
Fair enough. I mean, the correct answer is always, of course, pie because that's my answer, and It's called hypocrisy, but no, I love it because I love. Everyone always has different. Some people have gone like, well, what about pizza as a pie? Or a lot of times, if I ask Europeans, they'll go pie because they get savory pies too. So like
Mm.
pot pies and stuff like
Mm.
that. So that counts. But like then there's some people, I just love it. It's such a dumb question, but you'll always get different answers from everybody. Everyone justifies it differently.
Well, I mean, meatloaf could be considered meat cake, right?
Cheesecake's where it
If
gets
you're really
tricky.
stressing.
What's
Yeah,
that? I don't know.
that's actually true. That's a good point.
But
The my grandpa, the same one that used to inspire some of the union stuff in our game, is that he would when I was little, he would take us to a diner, whatever diner is nearby. And they'd always have the pie on display, and we'd make sure to get pie. And we'd had pie several times. And I remember him looking at me. He's like, Tyler, there's the two best flavors of pie of all time are. And do you know what those are? And I'd be like, no. And he'd let me guess. And over the course of the meal, I guess, blueberry or pumpkin or pecan or whatever. And he's like, no, no, no. Like the two best flavors of pie, hot and cold. That's all you need to know. Um, so I think that maybe that rubbed off on me a little bit.
That's awesome. Um, to close out, why don't you let people know where they can follow either you or Seismic Squirrel or Aether Iron, just if they want to keep up to date with y'all.
Yeah, so we are on Steam, but you can also find us on uh, our socials, Facebook, X. We have a Discord that we're pretty active and love the interaction and fan stories and just questions in general.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Discord is the best for just if they want to directly interact with us. We got a great community manager, Gina, and we're on there sometimes also answering the softballs. Yeah, I would recommend Discord to get the most
Well, thank you.
direct involvement.
Duane and Tyler, I appreciate your time. And Aether Iron is available now. And it's 2 days left if you want to snag it on a discount, because it is in
yeah,
fact the Steam sale. So
Yes, it
20%
is.
off. Not bad.
Yep. All
I
right,
just found
and
that out.
we are actively, if I'm not allowed to say, we're working on
yeah.
updates and
Oh, yeah, yeah,
quality of
yeah.
life and updates and upgrades and all sorts of things. We are actively working on the game right now, and we got some pretty good stuff on the horizon.
Fantastic. But thank you both very much for your time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right,
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
thanks.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.